Well, let's get started. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brian Trombley. I'm National Sales Director at Data Conversion Laboratory, and I'll be your moderator today. I want to welcome you to another DCL Learning Series webinar. This one is focused on best practices, cutting through the confusion on structured product labeling for OTC. With me today is my colleague Howard Schatz. Howard is DCL's project manager for structured product labeling. Howard's been with DCL since 1991, and he's been active in SPL since its development began in 2003. Howard is an active member of the SPL working group, which is composed of pharmaceutical companies and conversion vendors, and Howard is a frequent contributor to the SPL working group wiki discussion forum. He serves on the process communications, establishment registration, drug listing, and OTC sub-teams. Howard has a BS in computer science from New York University. And prior to joining DCL, Howard was an account manager at EDS. Today's agenda, going to spend just a few minutes talking about Data Conversion Laboratory, who we are and what we do for those of you who are unfamiliar. We'll also spend a few minutes talking about DCL's offerings in the life sciences space. And then Howard will take us through the area of establishment registration, NDC labeler codes, and drug listings as it applies to the OTC area of pharmaceuticals. We'll have ample time for question and answers at the end, so please, through your GoToWebinar interface, you can submit as many questions as you would like. A little bit about Data Conversion Laboratory. We've been providing conversion services for over 32 years, a lot of experience in XML since XML came of age, and prior to that SGML and other proprietary formats, and we've successfully converted well over 1 billion pages of information over the 32-year history that we have. We're a privately held, woman-owned small business headquartered in New York City. And of interest to this group, our staff includes a dedicated team focused exclusively on structured product labeling. DCL has expertise in large, complex conversion projects, substantial experience in managing multiple vendors for large-scale projects with automated tracking and reporting of data throughout. We employ sophisticated quality control workflow and both automated and human quality control steps to guarantee accuracy in all of our projects. Our life sciences offerings are structured primarily around structured product labeling, or SPL, the conversion of that labeling content and submission to the FDA. We also provide SPL consulting services and training, helping our clients navigate regulations as it relates to structured product labeling and providing them with the ability to get up to speed on new and existing regulations. We also offer drug sample reporting conversion. Last year, 2012, the FDA made it mandatory for drug companies and distributors to report distribution of drug samples. This is done through an XML file through the FDA submissions gateway, similar to how we submit the structured product labeling files. We also work with a number of life sciences companies, both medical device manufacturers and drug companies, in helping them manage documents in general. Typically, these might be product documentation, technical user and maintenance documentation, but also in the area of pharmaceuticals, quality and process documentation. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Howard, and Howard will begin taking us through. Thanks, Howard.
Okay, Brian. The questions that I've posted here are questions that are based on the actual questions that we get frequently from our clients, both OTC and prescription drugs, but focus on the ones that we get from the OTC manufacturers and distributors. So the first question is, for an establishment registration, which is an annual requirement from the FDA, is who needs to register? So it's any company that owns facilities that manufacture, package or repackage, label or relabel, or analyze drug products. Also, companies that manufacture active ingredients. So if you look at this list, it leaves off a lot of things, that a lot of types of companies that people think need to be registered using SPL. And the common question is, but I'm a distributor, don't I have to register? Or I'm an agent for a foreign establishment, do I need to register using SPL? And the answer is no. I mean, it's not that you don't have to, it's you can't. If you don't own facilities that are involved in any of the above manufacturing operations, you do not register. So, you know, that question is a rather common one, and so rest assured, as long as you're not, if all you're doing is, for example, if you warehouse drugs, you don't manufacture them, you don't package them, you don't register. That's another example. Another question I get is, do I have to register each facility separately? And the answer is you don't. The FDA's preference is actually that if a company owns subsidiaries that own facilities, they would prefer that the parent company lists all of the establishments that are owned by the subsidiaries, put them in one establishment registration. Makes life easier for them, and in my opinion, it also makes life easier for you. When it comes time for the annual registration notice, you don't need to, you don't do more than one establishment registration. If you have a company campus with multiple buildings involved in manufacturing, all having the same DUNS number, that's considered one establishment. The key point in an establishment registration is that both the registrant and each of the establishments have to have its own DUNS number. The registrant can have the same DUNS number as an establishment, but you can't have multiple establishments with the same DUNS number listed in your registration. Alternatively, you can register the establishment individually, meaning each establishment is its own registrant. So, you know, if you own several facilities, each facility will fill out a sheet as the registrant and then list itself as the establishment. Or as a group, if you own two subsidiaries, you might want each subsidiary to register its own establishments. Next slide, please. Now, another common question is, well, can somebody, my business partner prepare and submit the registration on my behalf? Or actually, the question tends to come from the business partner. I've got an establishment in China, and they don't understand any of these things. So do they have to do all this work? I said, no, you can do it for them. And it is a common practice, particularly for the foreign establishments, where the U.S. agents or the distributors of the product, they arrange to register the establishments they deal with. Now, an important note, that's this next paragraph, is that regardless of who prepares the registration, the registrant must be the company that owns the establishments. If it's the agent that's preparing it, the only place the agent's name will appear is in the slot for U.S. agent, where you have to fill in the information on the U.S. agent for the establishment. One second, my screen just went blank for a second here. Let's figure out what's going on. Okay, got it back. Does a contact listed for the registrant or an establishment need to work for the registrant or be located at the establishment? Now, this question, to be honest with you, this is not a question that I get. It's a suggestion, but it's a way of a recommendation that we make. The FDA does not care where the contact is located and who the contact works for. So if you're the U.S. agent, you can list yourself as the contact for all of the establishments that you register that you are registering. The key item for the establishment is that you have the establishment's actual street address and information, but when it comes time to listing the contact information, who should the FDA call or email, what's the phone number, what's the email address, you can put in your own. Another suggestion we make in that regard is that where you put in the email, if you have a couple of people who are familiar with the establishment, if your mail service allows it, set up a group mail account so that a mail sent to that email address will go to multiple people as determined by your server. So for example, here at DCL, we have the email address dclspl@dclab.com, and any mail sent to that address will go to all the people on the team. So this way, if your contact is on vacation and the FDA sends him an email, and the person does not have email access, if you have this group email address, somebody else, at least one other person, will see the email and be able to handle it. Now, before we move on to the NDC labeler code, I do want to mention the generic user drug facilities, and if you have questions on that, ask that at the end. It's generally for an OTC company that's not an applicable registration, but we do offer the service if you have a facility that manufactures generic drugs, meaning that it's cited on an abbreviated new drug application. In other words, it's not just manufacturing OTC products, purely OTC products under a monograph, but rather they're manufacturing drugs under an abbreviated new drug application, an ANDA, then you also need to register. I'll also mention that if you're confused about the registration dates, the annual establishment registration is now between October 1st and December 31st for the next calendar year. If you registered anytime in 2012, you don't have to do anything as far as an establishment registration until October 1st of this year. And between October 1st and December 31st of this year, you need to file your annual renewal. Anything before that will just be treated as an update to your 2013 information, but to register for 2014, you have to do it in October 1st through December 31st. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, the next series of questions are NDC labeler codes. And who needs to have it? The FDA, previously manufacturers were registering drugs that they manufactured for distributors, such as I'll use CVS and Walgreens and Rite Aid just because those are well-known names. And they might use their labeler code. The FDA does not want that to be the final drug form registration. The listing needs to be done using an NDC labeler code owned by the distributor. So if CVS is buying your drug, CVS needs to register and specify the CVS, use a CVS labeler code in the NDC. But the FDA also wants the manufacturer of the drug to list the drug under their labeler code. So the CVS drug will actually have two labeler codes that are known to the FDA. One is the manufacturer's NDC using their labeler code, and then the CVS labeler code. The manufacturer listed as a drug for further processing or an OTC drug manufactured exclusively for a private label distributor. So in that case, the manufacturer's listing does not get posted to the Daily Med, but the FDA will have it on file that they are the manufacturer. And the manufactured listing does not have to have the drug facts or package inserts or anything else that might be associated. The only content of labeling they need is just really the label that which they put on their containers. The next question is, can a company have multiple labeler codes? And the answer to that is yes. You can always request a labeler code, no matter how many label codes you already have. It's the FDA's decision whether or not to grant it. The FDA will definitely grant a second labeler code if the company has run out of product codes. In other words, if you go to the FDA and you say, I use a 3-digit product code and I've used up all of them or most of them or whatever, and I want to get another labeler code so I can continue to sell new drugs with the proper labeler code. So yes, you can request multiple ones, but you should have a reason other than convenience. It has to be a practical reason. Otherwise, the FDA may not grant it. Similar to the establishment registration, there's the question of, can business partners request label codes for the manufacturers and distributors they deal with? Again, you have these distributors that are selling their own drug under their own label, but they don't want the hassle of assigning NDCs and registering this. And yes, it's a common practice. The business partners, consultants, perhaps the manufacturers, perhaps. Will register will request the labeler code and also do the drug listings for them. If the distributor doesn't make, if the business partner, assuming the business partner is not the manufacturer, the distributor is the first one that should be doing it. If they're not doing it, if they're not making arrangements with somebody to do it, then the manufacturer should be doing it. And the FDA expects, if it's not done at all, they put the onus on the manufacturers to make sure it happens. And regardless of who requests a labeler, again, this is similar to the establishment registration. The registrants must be the company to whom the label code will be assigned, the manufacturer or distributor. Now, what will happen in the listing of the drug? If a drug is listed as a final drug using the manufacturer's label code, but it's CVS, for example, is actually the distributor, that listing, if it passes automatic validation, will be manually reviewed. And if the reviewer sees that the package image says that it's manufactured for CVS, they will go back to the manufacturer and say, what are you doing listing this as a final drug? It should be listed under CVS's labeler code. And they will therefore reject the submission, and you will get a validation letter, a letter from Lonnie, as I call it. But that is a manual process. It's not that it'll be automatically invalidated, but one of the things they do check is to see that the distributor is the labeler for the product. And if it's not, then they may come back to you, but they may not. But just to minimize the chance of a validation error, make sure that the distributor is the one who submits the final drug listing under the monograph. Okay, next slide. And similar to the establishment registration, does the contact listed for the registrant need to work for the registrant? And the answer is no. And again, it's just the FDA wants to have somebody to contact if there are any questions. Now, but know that the contact is the person who will be contacted by the FDA by email if this is a request for a new labeler code. If you've submitted it without a labeler code, that's a flag to the FDA that you want a new one. The FDA will then contact the contact person. They'll send them an email, and they'll have a few questions. I will just mention in passing, I was 2 SPL working group meetings this week, and at both of them it was mentioned that the FDA is working on some additional information to be filled in for the NDC labeler code request so that they will not need to send a follow-up email. So in other words, they haven't said exactly what the information is or when they'll be starting it, but just as a heads up. So in that case, when you fill out the form with this additional information, the FDA will then just be able to come back to you and let you know what your labeler code is. Right now, the process is that you request a labeler code. They send you an email with a few questions, some of which duplicate what you already put in. And then after you reply to that, then they assign you the labeler code. But always keep in mind that after they assign you the labeler code, you must register it using SPL in order to complete the registration process of that labeler code. It's not enough that they assigned it to you. You must then register it using SPL. Okay, moving on to drug listings. So now the drugs that were listed in the paper world using Form 2657, for those who remember it, prior to June 2009, from a regulatory standpoint, if the drug or the packaging have not changed since you registered it back then in paper, there is no regulatory requirement to do so, to register, to list the drug using SPL, but they're commonly listed for the benefits of an SPL listing. For those who aren't aware of it, well, I have here the inclusion on the Daily Med. Any drug that's listed in final drug form goes onto the Daily Med. It also goes onto the FDA online label repository. So if people are looking for a drug with a particular ingredient, they can then go back. They can find your drug. If your drug is not listed using SPL and they search on the Daily Med or the FDA repository, for all drugs with that active ingredient, or the proprietary name, they won't find it. Also, business partners, what our clients have been telling us is that their business partners have been saying, we want you to be listed using SPL. For Medicare, Medicaid reimbursements, a drug must be listed using SPL. So if the healthcare providers aren't getting repaid by Medicare or Medicaid, if not being reimbursed, they may come back to the distributor and say, hey, you know, guy, I want to get reimbursed for this drug. Please list it using SPL. And certainly, if it's newly introduced drug or reformulated drug or drug whose packaging has changed, you need to list to be compliant with the regulations. Okay, now we're getting, this is somewhat of a repeat of what I said about the NDC labeler codes. So who needs to list? The FDA wants the final drug product to be listed using the NDC codes that are based on the label code of the distributor. And when they're two separate companies, the distributor and the manufacturer, the distributor can be responsible for creating the SPL for the final drug listing, otherwise the manufacturer needs to do it. But when the manufacturer does it, they list the distributor as the labeler, and they put themselves in as the registrant and as an establishment. That's when the manufacturer does it for the distributor. The manufacturer should submit a listing using NDC codes based on its label code in the marketing category. For this audience, OTC drug manufactured exclusively for private label distributor. Next slide, please. And can the drug listings be done only by the manufacturer or the distributor? No. Again, a consultant, U.S. agent, importer can prepare the SPL on behalf of either the manufacturer or distributor. Now, in such a case, people are confused by this, but their company will not appear in the drug listing. If they're not the distributor and they're not involved in the manufacturing process, then there is no place to show, in the metadata at least, of their involvement. If you want to put it somehow on the package for any reason, it'll show up on the package text, but not in the metadata that the FDA wants to see. And similarly, the gateway submission can be done by a third party. For those using our gateway service, you know this already. It doesn't have to be done directly by the manufacturer or the distributor, but it can be done by whoever. There is a administrative step in there, which is that whether it's the manufacturer or the manufacturer or the distributor has to notify the FDA that they're authorizing this company to be the submitter of their submission. That's the gateway. People have that for legal reasons. Next, we come to the question of an NDC for each level of packaging. So, for example, you have a vial that is packaged in a carton. For OTC purposes, the answer is only the outermost container needs to have an NDC. But again, we get back to the Medicare and Medicaid reimbursement scenario. So if a healthcare provider is going to request reimbursement at the vial level, as in the example I give, if you package 2 vials in a carton and they want to be reimbursed for 1 vial, that single vial has to have an NDC. So that would mean that you should do it. But if that's not a factor in there, then you do not need an NDC other than at the topmost level. But once you have an NDC at a lower level, all levels, I think, I mean, up until a certain point, you can't have an NDC at the first level and an NDC at the third level and not an NDC at the second level. But you can have the first 2 levels, the outermost and the second level can have NDCs and not the bottom level. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, the next 2 slides, this really completes the presentation of the issues. We'll have a Q&A session after I get through the next 2 slides. What are on these 2 slides are the sites that are very useful for drug listing purposes. There's our own DCL SPL page. The FDA has a SPL resources page which has a lot of useful links. The Daily Med is one place you can look at the final drugs that are listed. And they're now up to the FDA is very proud of the fact that they've gotten over 50,000 drugs currently on the Daily Med. Now, the FDA also maintains an online label repository. At this point, it's pretty much identical to the Daily Med. The label repository is limited to only the listings done after June 2009. And the Daily Med used to have a lot of drugs that were listed before 2009, but most of those have been updated. I don't know, the last time I saw there was a count of 8 labels on the Daily Med that were not on the label repository. Another useful site is the Decker site, Drug Establishment's current registration site. That'll tell you the registration status of any establishment. So again, if you're filling out SPL and you want to make sure a company is registered as an establishment for your drug, you can go to this site. The FDA Substance Registration System search page is a go-to page to get unis. For those of you who filled out the SPL, you know that you have to have a uni for every ingredient. And you get the uni, which is an identifier for the ingredient. You get that from this search page. If you're interested in regulatory issues, you go to the CFR Title 21 online. For OTC drugs, you go to the, the 333 or 332, whatever the part number is, and you can see what the regulations are there. The SPL Working Group Wiki has a lot of useful information. They have training slides provided that, well, they link you to FDA training slides. They also have discussions forums. I've gotten a lot quieter. I see a lot few. It sounds like people are getting used to SPL. They don't have as many questions popping up there. And there's other documentation. Next slide, please. Okay, now I put this in this top one, drug nomenclature monographs. It just gives some definition to the terminology. You know, if in SPL, as you're probably aware, there's very controlled terminology to describe the package and the dosage form and whatnot. So this page has links to monographs that define those terms, but bear in mind that some terms may not be allowed in SPL. This site was not developed for SPL. It's a site that I found later on, and I said I'm going to keep this in mind when people ask what's the difference between a carton or a box and a box. My answer is actually there's not much difference if you define a box or a carton, but it's really your call. But you can go into the details. Certainly for OTC products, you want to see the rulemaking information. You go to this sites of OTC rulemakings. You go in by your product type, and you select it, and you get all sorts of regulatory information. The Pragmatic Data Validator Lite is a publicly available site that the FDA offers, through which you can validate your SPL to see that it will pass validation by the FDA. The caveat on that is that the publicly available validator Lite only gets 90 to 95% of the possible errors that the FDA's internal validator will get. The errors that it can't identify, that the FDA internal validator will identify, are cases such as the wrong set ID being used, changes to a section and you didn't change the ID for the section, changes to the product information, changes to the package information. Well, any error that any validation rule the FDA has that requires looking at something else other than the label that itself will not be identified by the Pragmatic Data Validator. But we still recommend that you use it. If DCL is your conversion vendor, we encourage you to go there and satisfy yourself that it passes validation according to the validator. The only caveat I put on there is that if you simply validate an SPL file, then there are two choices in the Pragmatic Data Validator. One is to validate an SPL file by itself. Another is to validate a zip file that has both the SPL and the images. If you validate just the SPL file, then you will get an error for each of your images because it doesn't know that the images are there. If you go, so this error about reference to an image you can ignore in the case of validating an SPL file by itself. But if you validate a zip file that contains the SPL with the images, if you get any errors, whether it's images or not images, then you have a validation error that you need to look into. And now the next couple are email addresses. If you want to contact the FDA SPL group, that's a very simple one, spl@fda.hhs.gov. If you have questions, regulatory type questions, and you want to contact the FDA, that you contact there, or questions about your product and why isn't it listed on Daily Med or things like that, you can contact the Drug Registration Listing System. That's at edrls@fda.hhs.gov. The E at the beginning of that address, email address is for electronic drug registration listing. Now, the next two are two important files that enter into the validation that can help you avoid errors or explain errors. The first one is the active ingredient, active moiety relationship basis of strength. So you click on the link, it'll say, do you want to open up the zip file? You say you do. Then it asks, then it'll show you the contents of the zip file. You open the spreadsheet, and it'll put out a spreadsheet that'll tell you for the active ingredient that you have what the active moiety should be. For those who may not be familiar with the term active moiety, it's the part of the ingredient that gives the drug, that makes the drug medically effective. And that's about the extent of my knowledge of it. But most drugs, the active ingredient and the active moiety are the same. But there are drugs where it's only a part of the active ingredient that really makes it medically effective. The other parts are added for production purposes or other purposes, but not related to giving medical benefit. And then it also says what the basis of strength. When you specify your active ingredient, you have to specify what its strength is, and the basis of the strength is either the active ingredient or the active moiety. There's another possibility which is rare, but it's a reference drug. But that's an extremely rare case. For the most part, just focus on those two choices. This spreadsheet will tell you what the basis of strength is. So if you say that the active ingredient has a certain strength that's based on the active ingredient, but this spreadsheet says the strength has to be expressed in terms of the active moiety, you will get a validation error, and you need to make that adjustment. This last one is the FDA OTC Monograph active ingredient. Now, there are two types of OTC products. For the purpose of our discussion, there are two types of products. There are those that are done under an OTC final monograph, and those that are done under a monograph that's not final. It was posted in a Federal Register for comment, but it was never made final by the FDA. For the ones that are done under a final monograph, there is a relatively new validation check. And what they do is that they make sure that each of the active ingredients that you specify for the product that you say is done under an OTC monograph for final monograph for a particular part, they make sure that each of the active ingredients are in fact allowed for drugs, for those types of drugs, sold, distributed under the OTC final monograph for that part. If any ingredient is not on that, in that spreadsheet for that particular part for an OTC final monograph, you will get a validation error. Previously, they were checking just to make sure at least one of the ingredients was valid for the part. Now it's all of the ingredients have to be valid for the part. When it comes to the OTC monograph not final, then it's just the check to make sure that at least one of the active ingredients is a valid active ingredient for that part. Okay, and the next slide is just the Q&A. So I guess we can now turn this over to you and to the audience and the questions that they have.
Right, and thank you very much, Howard. There are a few questions here already, but please, if you have any additional questions, you can submit those through the question dialog box. 3 questions here right now, Howard.
Okay.
The first one, which category covers manufacturer drug listing?
I assume they mean the question is which marketing category, and there are 2 categories. Well, for OTC, there are 2 categories. It might be just drug for final processing. In other words, this drug isn't in final form, and somebody else is going to finish the packaging or whatever it is. Then that would be that would be that category of drug for further processing. The other category for an OTC drug is OTC drug product manufactured exclusively for private label distributor. Okay, and that's the case where the drug is in final form. You might be shipping it in bulk or whatever, but you know, so you can call it. You can use that category. Other companies, other manufacturers do it all for the distributor and just ship them the final boxes. So either way, those are the two categories. If it's a prescription drug, there's another category called approved drug for final manufactured exclusively for private label distributor, and that would be used for a prescription drug manufactured under an ANDA or an NDA.
Great. Thanks, Howard. A couple more questions here. First one, if a distributor registers a product with their NDC labeler code, does the manufacturer also have to register that product? And I think we've addressed that, but just go over that one more time. Right.
Yeah, it's not clear to me that it's a regulatory requirement, but the FDA is saying that that's what they want to happen. That the manufacturer. Now, what they say is if the manufacturer manufactures for multiple distributors, for for CVS, Walgreens, and Rite Aid, for argument's sake, they just do one registration, one listing. OTC drug manufactured exclusively for private label distributor. That's all they have to do. Okay, just the one listing for the same product that's sold to different distributors, but each distributor would be listing separately, or the manufacturer might be listing for each of them separately. Is that clear enough?
Great, Howard. Thanks. And then sort of the same question in reverse. If the manufacturer registers a product with their distributor's NDC labeler code, do they also have to register with their own NDC labeler code, and can it be done in one process, one registration?
Okay, that's a two-part question, and so the answer is the same. Regardless of who registers the final drug product, the FDA wants the manufacturer to register as well. So even if the manufacturer does the listing for the labeler, they have to do their own listing with themselves as the manufacturer as the labeler. And the second part of that question, can you do it in one listing? The answer is no. What you can do is you can take, if you've already done the distributor listing, you can take the distributor listing and make the appropriate changes, which is to change the labeler and to remove the registrant. Again, if the manufacturer did the SPL for the distributor, the manufacturer should be the registrant. When they do it for themselves, they should take themselves out as the registrant. So they would change the labeler, remove the registrant, and they would need to change, I should say, all of the NDC codes that are there. Right? I mean, it has to be the NDC codes for the manufacturer, based on the manufacturer's labeler code.
Great, and that's all the questions we have right now. Any other questions, folks? Please feel free to submit them, and we'll get them answered. We've got plenty of time. No, it looks like that's it for the questions, and I just want to thank everybody for their time today. One thing I might suggest, if any of you would like a copy of the presentation, and especially the useful links that Howard showed on the previous two slides, you can email Howard directly and request that. Howard's email address, Howard, you want to give that, please?
It's hshatz, HSHATZ, at DCLAB.com. Okay. And I guess that's it. Everybody gets 15 minutes back to their day. We've gotten through this fairly quickly, and I just want to thank everybody for their time today.
We do have DCL Learning Series webinars on a regular basis, 2 or 3 times a month, covering different topics. Howard tends to do at least a couple of a year, focused specifically on SPL, but we do webinars on other aspects, data conversion in general, XML, data content management, ebook production, so on and so forth. So please check our website, upper right-hand corner. There's a link to all the upcoming webinars, and check it often. And if there's something of interest, please register. And with that, we'll be done. And thank you all once again. Good day.
Bye-bye.